Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card uses the Stampin' Up! Peaceful Pine set. I'm using this tree at the bottom with the branches, and I've got a cool technique with some distress inks. So I'm going to start off by taking a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch Strathmore 90-pound watercolor paper, and I'm going to mark it at 1 1/4 inch from the bottom. Then I'll use my T-square, which comes in handy for drawing straight lines, and I'm going to draw a line straight across that 1 1/4 inch mark, and this is going to be used as a guide for stamping my trees. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark the center of this panel so that I know exactly where my center tree needs to be stamped, and then I'll move out from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is then stamp this pine tree with some pine needles ink. I've got it inked up, and now I'm going to take my Gathered Twigs distress marker, and I am going to get some green on it since I just inked it up with some pine needles ink, but it's okay because you can't contaminate your distress markers. You just write on a piece of scratch paper and the green comes right off, and the next thing you know it's Gathered Twigs again. So I'm going to stamp that right in the middle. And then I'm going to take a piece of surgical tape. This is just a very thin paper tape that's waterproof, actually, I found. And I'm going to take that and press it right against the line that I had drawn. So when I stamped down my tree, I made sure that the bottom leaves or the branches of my tree were hitting that pencil line that I drew across my cardstock. And now I'm going to stamp 2 more on each side, one in forest moss. And I'm not going to worry too much about the trunk because those trunks are now masked off. So I only get the trunk on the middle tree. And then for my outside trees, I'm going to use crushed olive, 1 on each side. And this technique works best with distress inks. And now I'm going to take that surgical tape and I'm going to do a line at the very top at the tip of those trees, and they should all be even because I used that pencil line as a guide with the mask on it. Okay, so I'm going to take this number 6 paintbrush, and it's kind of thick in the middle and it comes to a very thin point, and a glass of water. And I'm going to just have water on my brush. I'm not going to use any ink, paint, or anything. I'm going to start in the middle on my pine needles, and I'm just going to go in up and down motions. And what it's going to do, it's going to release the ink on my paper, but I'm still going to get an image of that tree. It's going to be just a little fainter. And as soon as I start to hit a new ink color, I'm going to refresh the water so I don't get too much muddy. I'm not going to muddy it up, and because I want there to be separate colors that sort of blend into each other just a little bit. So once I get to the edge, I'm going to touch it up a little bit on the edges of the masking tape, and then I'll start back in the middle, and I'm going to now move toward the left. And I'm going to be careful to go mostly just up and down. You don't want to do a lot of side to side because I wanted it to look more of just kind of some swishes that were going up and down. I didn't want it to be just random colors all over the place. I wanted it to be pretty consistent across. So I'm going to keep going all the way over to the left now. And it's really amazing that this masking tape is waterproof, so you don't have to worry about it seeping underneath at all. Alright, so now I'm going to take my tape off, and I did notice that the distress ink on the trunks of the trees did come through a little bit, and I'm going to fix that later. But first I let it dry. So you can see here a little bit came off under the tape. I guess the tape was a little too thin, or I had too much ink on there, but you could put 2 layers of the masking tape, of the surgical tape, and that should prevent your ink from going in. But I just took a sanding block and I sanded it out, and when you use watercolor paper, it's a really thick layered paper, so it's pretty easy to get any ink mistakes off, and they were just light mistakes. So now I'm going to take pine needles. I'm going to stamp that center one again. So I'm going to do the same exact thing I did before, which is ink up the whole thing with pine needles, and then just take my Gathered Twigs marker and color directly on the stamp on top of that pine needles. And then I'm just going to go right on top, and it doesn't have to be exact. In fact, it looks a little bit better if it's just a tiny bit off. I really like the way this turned out, so it really makes that center tree pop. Now my trunk didn't have a really solid image because I colored, the distress markers aren't great at coloring on stamps, so I just filled that in with the fine tip of the marker. Next I'm going to stamp this star in crushed curry. It's a Stampin' Up! Ink. And then I'm going to take my Hero Arts Christmas Sentiment Set, which I use all the time. It has some great sayings in it, and I bring it out every year. And I'm going to curve it. So what I'd like to do is I curve it directly on the block, and I sort of estimate how I want it to be curved. And if you have a good photopolymer, high quality photopolymer stamp like Hero Arts, Simon Says Stamp, and Lawn Fawn, and all those, they should stick to the block with no issue. Now if you have like an acrylic or silicone stamp, it may not stick very well to your block. So you need a good quality stamp to get a good curved image. So I've got it curved on my block here. I've got some VersaFine ink, and I'm going to be really super careful because if this messes up, my whole card is ruined. So I'm kind of holding my breath as I stamp this down, and luckily it turned out good. Anyway, okay, so now I'm going to adhere this to a card base of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I'm going to take some stickles. This is my favorite stickles. It's just plain yellow. I use the stickles for stars all the time. And I'm just going to put a dot right in the center. And this dot was a little bit too much, so I'm going to remove some of it. But what I do is I take a paper piercer and I move it toward the tip. And you can see here I'm having trouble because I have too much. So I'm going to lay it very parallel to the paper and kind of twist my paper piercer so that I can kind of gather up some of that stickles. I'm going to do it again here. And I'm going to wipe it off on this scratch sheet of paper, and that'll be enough to really do a good job of spreading out, because if it's too thick then it won't come out to a nice point. So I'm going to push this glitter out to the edges and it'll cover the whole thing, and it's good to have a nice colored base, which is why I use the crushed curry underneath. And that is the card for today. It's a really simple card that I think you can make a lot of if you're doing bulk Christmas cards. And it looks really pretty, like I spent a lot of time on it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.